Hello, friends. Thank you for joining me today. My name is Namdi Nake, and I host Nationhood podcast. Today, I am excited to present the third edition of Conversations, where we bring historical perspectives to current issues. Our guest is Oyinade Adekunle, an assistant lecturer of history at the University of Lagos and a doctoral candidate at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Mr. Adekunle's work examines African and legal history, interests in human rights, and the history of crime in former British colonies. In today's episode, we'll be discussing Nigeria's relationship with capital punishment and bringing historical perspectives to this phenomenon from political, economic, and sociocultural perspectives. Amongst other things, Mr. Adekunle also works on the history of capital punishment in Nigeria and its global implications on human rights. And so, without further ado, I am honored to welcome Oyinade Adekunle to Nationhood Podcast. Oyin, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Nandi. Thank you. I feel honored to be here. So yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for coming. I know it was a bit difficult to get you because your schedule is very, very busy. So I really, really appreciate that you are able to join me today. And I'm sure the listeners of the podcast are going to gain a lot in terms of learning and diving into this world of history where you are an expert. So let us begin with your background as a legal historian and researcher. There are at least two questions that I want to dig into here. So the first one is, what is so fascinating about history as an academic field, and why have you chosen legal history as a field of research?
Okay. Thank you for that. That takes me back to like my interview sessions into grad school. So yeah. Um,
I didn't mean to bring back those memories,
it's good.
especially if they're not so fond.
It's good. For me, it was more of like a deep personal interest in history and legal history as a focus, basically. So when I was growing up and everybody wanted to be, because if you're in art class, you either want to be a lawyer or probably do something in political science or something. But I wanted to go into like crime, studying crime, like a criminologist or something. And
Mm,
being a young student in Nigeria, there were like limited options for criminologists. And then I realized early that there's something called history. There was a course called history. I did history in
mm,
school. And then I understood, oh, there is now like a university degree called history. I'm like, okay, fast.
mm,
But I didn't want to just focus on the local history that we have then, history of kingdoms, history of empires. But based on going through the prospectus, I found out that there were some interesting courses like
mm-hmm,
history of crime. Like, oh wow, this is interesting.
mm-hmm.
And that was it for me. And that was what generated my interest in the beginning to go into studying history. And for legal history, I'm the kind of person that I'm always interested in just getting, I'm more interested in the stories. And I think that's why I enjoy history. I'm interested in not just the outcome, or the stories behind the outcome and the results. And for legal history, you'll probably find me watching crime shows, the ones that will probably scare you at night and all shows on, shows on murder, shows on crime. Like,
Mm,
it's always interesting to like look at the twists and turns and try to figure out like what are these things that um brought up or precipitated this action. So yes, so I think it was more of a personal interest that just aligned in my favor, basically. And I'm glad that legal history now is something that people talk about. It's something that people recognize. Because even then, in university, it wasn't so pronounced. Most people were in economic history, or in social history generally. But now I see that legal history and human rights, like we'll discuss today, is now something that has drawn global attention when we look at everything that is going on. So it's so fascinating. Like I would go through archival records and I'm reading these stories and people ask me, or scholars, senior scholars have asked me, like, how do you deal with the mental part of reading some
Mm,
gory stories? I'm like, to me, it just looks like you're reading a very nice story or reading,
mhm.
yeah. So it's nothing for me. So I just enjoy it. So I'm just lucky to be doing something I enjoy. Yeah.
That is amazing. I like it, because it's also inspiring because a lot of other historians I've spoken to say similar things, and I can say the same for myself in terms of my own approach to history. My own focus is technology history, and it's a subject of passion,
Yeah.
something that one is interested in.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that, you're able to share your own experience because it shows that, your own personal interests are valid in terms
Yeah.
of pursuing your personal interests on a professional level,
Yeah.
that kind of thing. And quite interesting. So, given that you've practiced history in Nigeria and also are currently practicing history in Canada as a researcher, I'm curious to know what your impression is in terms of differences or similarity, say from the methods and sources, to maybe even useful resources that may be available in one location and are not available in another location, stuff like that. So, for example, is it more common to practice, say, oral history in Nigeria than in Canada or stuff like that? Just what is your experience having,
Yeah.
worked in these two different spaces as a historian? Now you can speak about anything that comes to mind.
Okay. If you go back to the basics, like the foundation, looking at the methodology, um, the grounding, the foundation for history students. Let's just go back to being history students,
Mm-hmm.
become scholars. Nigeria formed my foundation. There were courses that I took in undergrad that were compulsory as an history student or an history major student. That when I got to Canada, I was told that I needed to do some of these courses. But having gone through my transcripts, the department was like, "Oh, you've done these courses multiple times, so you don't need to." And it just opened my eyes to, oh wow, there's that misplaced thinking or ideology that, oh, back in African countries or developing countries, the education system is not up there
Mm-hmm.
compared to North America. But I would say that's wrong. Especially if you have history lecturers or scholars that are also deeply rooted. So I had like top-notch scholars that even teaching here in North America, I've taken some classes where the lecturers here are using literature produced by my lecturers back in Nigeria. So the core history, the methodology, looking at European historiography, African historiography, introduction to historiography, the research methods involved, I
Mm-hmm.
was firmly rooted in that in Nigeria. But coming here, there was more of the theoretical part rather than looking at the practical application. And I think that's the disconnect. In Nigeria, if you are taught introduction to historiography, there is like a project or a mini project that comes along with it to see if you really understand it. But
Yeah.
I didn't see that really coming, showing through in everything. And I think in Nigeria, there was also the um, consideration of other areas. So Nigeria, the curriculum didn't just focus on Nigeria or Africa. There was that understanding of other regions or other continents. So you take classes from Asia, you take classes from North America, you take classes from
Mm-hmm.
Europe and all that. But coming to North America, there's that stereotypical. It was very difficult for me to even pick my courses.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because then I'm seeing history of China. I'm like, "Ah, this is not connected to what I want to research on
Mm-hmm.
history of." So
Yeah.
me thematically, geographically, it was very difficult for me to pick my courses here
Mm-hmm.
in Canada. So I think that's something they need to pay attention to. When people ask me, "Oh, what do you think you need to improve?" Yes, we have the scholars, but also consider that history is a wide spectrum. So
Mm-hmm.
just looking at courses that are Europe or North America connected, it's very hard. And if you're looking at
Yeah.
Africa, you have to know that Africa is wide. Because before you look at East Africa, it's enough before looking at other regions. So I think that
Yeah.
that consideration or understanding of how diverse the history research is, and not just say, oh, yeah, in North America, so just focus on areas or topics thematically or directly connected to the area. Because in Nigeria, it's not like that. You would have to take courses across board just to ensure that you're not just a myopic researcher, but you have a broad knowledge. You don't want to be known as a Nigerian. You want to have that global experience. So I think the core foundation and just the diversity of the curriculum, I would say, yeah.
Well, I'm really, really glad to hear that. That is something that is heartwarming, because a lot of people have the impression that history is not something that is treated in any in-depth manner in Nigeria. Maybe at the levels before university, that may be the case, and I don't know very well. Maybe you can shed some light on
When I
that.
was growing up, history was compulsory till your final exams in SS3. It was compulsory. But when I was in undergrad or after I graduated, I heard that it was scrapped. It's scrapped. I'm like, nah, that sucks.
Yeah. It's certainly, but that narrative, just tends to present, at least in my case, the general impression that, maybe there's a lot of work to do in that space. But hearing from you, about your experience going through the university system in Nigeria and, really setting this strong foundation that became a basis for Canadian historians system to say, oh, you have all you need foundationally and you are really well equipped for this, is quite heartwarming and positive, thing to take away about history as a practice in Nigeria. Okay, let's speak a bit more broadly about your area of expertise in terms of as a legal historian. And speaking about criminal justice, my understanding of criminal justice as an area is that it typically consists of three institutions: the police, the courts, and the prisons in Nigeria. And this may also be the case in some other parts of the world, but you can correct me if I'm not correct. So can you shed some light, or your own understanding of the philosophy behind this tripod system, and what kind of complementary roles are each of these institutions supposed to play in a criminal justice system, using Nigeria, for example?
Thank you. I think you've done your research already. So yeah, I call them the threefold institution because
The threefold institutions.
Yeah, I call
Okay.
them threefold institutions. When I'm doing my research or a write-up that is connected to criminal justice or crime, you have to look at these three institutions because there is no way you would produce a qualitative report or research if you do not consider these three. And you cannot escape it because they are connected and intertwined in various levels. So when it comes to criminal justice, and this dates back to the beginning, it could have existed in various forms or elements, but terms of like rule of law present in the courts, terms of like crime control present in the police, and the third institution, you see that when it comes to criminal justice, you can't talk about justice without looking at law. You can't talk about justice without looking at the other dimensions of crime. You can't talk about justice without looking at the enforcers and those involved in ensuring that the laws are upheld or the punishment that comes for disobeying or contradicting the provisions of the law. So for criminal justice, I would say that this threefold institutions are the core of any discussion that has to do with criminal justice. So if you come down to Nigeria, as far back as even pre-colonial Nigeria, we had the court system, we had the elders. Let's look at the Igbos. So you had the elders where they will discuss and decide that, oh, this is what this person has done. despite the fact there was no king or there was no like a police system
Mm,
we have it today, they would sit down and decide, oh, this is what you've done. You've gone against the ordinances of the land, and this is your
mm,
punishment. In just that sitting, they've served as the police. After investigation has been done
mm,
on private time, they've served as the police. They've brought out the reports. They've investigated. They've produced information stating because they are aware or they have the knowledge of the laws of the land or the ordinance of the
mhm,
land, and they also pass the judgment as the courts. So we see
mm,
that even in pre-colonial Nigeria, this threefold system existed sometimes in one unit. So
mm,
in terms of the clan or the elders in Igbo,
mhm,
you see that in Yoruba land, you have the court, the king's courts, where there are men and in some cases even women that are in the palace with the king. They debate and
yeah,
talk about it. Yeah. So you see cases, I don't know if you watch epic movies where the criminal is just held outside and waiting for
mhm,
the king and the chiefs to decide what the punishment would be. And
yeah,
the criminal is begging for him
mm,
and all those things. So
yeah,
even in colonial Nigeria, I would say
mhm,
Africa too, you would see that these threefold institutions exist in most cases in a unit. So
mm,
with colonial era and post-colonial era, there's now that division of trying to like ensure like separation of powers and all that. But at the end of
mhm,
the day, these three must connect. It's a must.
mm.
So we see that in criminal justice, as far back as we can remember, it has always been recognizing the power that these institutions yield.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned that because it really segues nicely into the next question I had, which flows from the last one. I'm aware that there is a lot of debate about the origins of Nigeria's criminal justice system. Some people argue that it is Western and colonial in origin, maybe
Yeah.
very similar to what you've just mentioned about how pre-colonial times it might be one body that embodies these three different aspects of, processing crime and, processing criminals. And some other people say that um, criminal justice in places like Nigeria are, entirely post-colonial because several decades have passed since the colonial era.
Yeah.
Even if it was introduced by the colonials, we still can't be crying about what
Yeah.
works or doesn't work around it. So I'm curious to know what your thoughts are about it. How do you view criminal justice in Nigeria? Is it as a colonial novelty or something that is fully Nigerian or a hybrid, or is it just a change of model for compare it to what you were describing earlier, the scenario where you have the elder sitting and making judgment and pronouncements and what have you?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Um, so to buttress what I've said before, I wouldn't want to repeat that. So beyond that, let's now I'll streamline into capital punishment. So when I was doing like the literature review for my work on capital punishment in Nigeria, I decided I was just going to absorb the knowledge, like try as much as possible not to decide even before reading the literature. Like don't affiliate or align yourself with one school of thought or so that
Mm,
you are able to assimilate as much information and understand the various views and sides when it comes to the origin of
hmm.
criminal justice or even capital punishment to be
Yeah.
specific. And I'll start with the literature. And that was what made me understand when we talk about research methodology or historiography, and they're talking about Eurocentric views and Afrocentric views, you would see that come through so much when discussing
Hmm.
criminal justice and capital punishment. So, for
Hmm.
example, some literatures which I have tried to critique or have critiqued, have said that capital punishment was a colonial creation. However, having gone to the archives and having interviewed like people from various royal families or clans and people that were alive, luckily I got few that were alive even before the British colonized Nigeria. I found out that there was capital punishment before colonialism. at least I can speak for Nigeria. And that was quite eye-opening, because if you pick up a typical literature written by a non-African, let me put it that way, or a non-Nigerian, 90% of such literature that I've picked up have said that capital punishment was a colonial creation. And that's something I'm trying to like refute and say no. And because evidence-based as an historian, I remember I went to, I think, Ebonyi State, and I'd already interviewed this very old 90-something-year-old man that said, oh, they used to execute, but it was the last option. Like after all options have failed, that was when execution was carried out. And it got like the younger generation, like some youths, to take me to like a farmland where executions were carried out in pre-colonial Nigeria. And the way they carried out execution, obviously different, where they would dig, like tell the criminal, to condemned criminal in this case, to dig the ground like you're going to plant something. And then this criminal goes into that hole, which he dug, and then they put like a tree, like a plant on his head, and then bury the person alive. So it is the plant that now grows and becomes the trees, like palm trees. And so they were able to tell me, like, can you see that palm tree? That is from a condemned criminal. So I saw some of those palm trees and I was able to like pictures. And I'm like, oh, this is evidence from pre-colonial Nigeria. Do you know how many decades that's like way past, and we still see that representation today? And that was enough, and other collaborative stories that showed that capital punishment is not a colonial creation. And that even spreads to other aspects of criminal justice. However, I would say the approach is what is different, or the idea is what is different.
Okay.
So for pre-colonial Nigeria, it was more of like restorative justice, the idea of restorative justice, rather than retributive. And there was that sympathy that still comes with it. Everybody I spoke with would say last option was capital punishment. They will have banishing you, asking you to pay a price, either in animals like goats and all that, to the family of the victims, or do something, or reprimand you, like give like a warning before thought to execution or capital punishment. But in the colonial era, it was different. It was more of a power thing. It was more of like let us assert ourselves as being in control. So imagine if they were given, if a British officer or the British court system then was saying, oh, okay, this is your warning, this is your last warning, it will make them feel like they were weaklings. So they assert their power at the get-go. So you see the idea was different. So it was more of like, execute this person has committed a crime, and that's it. So it was not really about ensuring crime control, basically. It was more about asserting the colonial power during the colonial period. However, in pre-colonial period, it was not really about power. It was just about ensuring law and order. So it's just about ensuring that this is still my person, this is still my brother at the end of the day, or my sister. So how we can move forward from this. But if all options have been tried and there's nothing coming up, and it's like this person is not listening and doesn't want to change, that is where execution comes in. So I think it's the idea behind the execution that was different, or the approach towards it that was different. Not that it did not exist at all. So yeah.
That is very, very enlightening. Thank you for sharing that. I've done a bit of work on prisons, and so I can relate very much with what you're saying. If I may, maybe I'll use the word philosophy in terms of what drives those processes, as in from what happened in the pre-colonial period to what happened in the colonial era. And for the benefit of listeners, you mentioned two important terms. You spoke about restorative justice, which you also clarified, speaking about how the justice processes in these pre-colonial societies were targeted towards maintaining social equilibrium. How do I make sure everybody's dignity is restored, so to speak, versus the colonial system where it's retributive, which one can take to mean like about getting an eye for an eye back, maybe revenge if you like, but maybe
Yeah.
not so many words. But you
Sure.
did this to me, so I have to do it back to you. You damage the society, we have to take care of and deal with that, something of that nature.
Yeah.
But really, 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 really helpful. And I'm glad you spoke about capital punishment specifically. In fact, you answered the question I was going to ask next. But let me now go on to ask you what kind of um, historically offenses have attracted the death sentence, and how has that changed over time? So speaking about pre-colonial societies where someone who's not taking correction, eventually might get, this capital punishment. But are there some specific examples of misdemeanors or misbehaviors or crimes that could have, attracted capital punishment? And then how has this evolved over time? What are the kind of crimes people typically that have typically attracted, capital punishment in Nigeria over time?
Okay. So change is constant, and I think when it comes to capital crimes, that's also the same situation. So if we start from pre-colonial period, we understand the diversity of Nigerians' culture. So for every cultural system or for every region in Nigeria, they had their own. Remember, we talked about the threefold institutions. They had their
Mm-hmm.
own ordinances, they had their own rules, they had their own laws, where you hear things like abomination. That's a taboo.
Mm,
Yeah,
yeah.
today that was their law. So in various areas then, so we'll start from pre-colonial and I'll just look at maybe the east, the western, and the northern.
Okay.
So um, so for the western part, crimes of murder cuts across, let's just cuts across all three regions, the north, the west, or the east.
Mm-hmm.
Crimes of murder. So if you executed someone, there's the possibility of being executed. I use the word possibility because then there was nothing like manslaughter and murder.
Mm,
Kill
yeah.
someone, execute someone. So
Yeah.
it's when they now go through like, okay, what happened? Uh, then they decide like, oh, is this the kind of murder that we should execute you for? Or is it something we can just give you a warning, ask you to pay something?
Mm,
So that's why I said the probability.
mhm.
Other crimes for the Western part, if you sleep with the king's wife,
If you sleep with the king's wife,
that's the queen.
well,
Whether
I
she
can I can understand I can understand why that will attract capital punishment.
yeah, so if you are caught
The
sleeping
kings
with
are
the
not playing.
they're not playing because then they also have to like aside you can't be sharing what the king
But
has.
they have more than one wife. Why can't they share? Most of them
But
they have
you're
many wives.
yeah, you're not royalty, so you would be executed. And
Mm,
I have like some archival sources and you read very interesting stories of like, really? Why did you
mm-hmm.
do this yourself? Um,
Yes.
so sleeping with the king's wife in the north, that's
Mm-hmm.
amongst the Hausas, it's very tricky because there's also the part of religion. They
Religion too, right?
would say that before the colonial period, there was still Islam. So
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't as if it was the British that brought Islam.
Yeah. Danfodio and his jihad had happened, I mean, as early
Exactly.
as
11th,
1804, 1805,
exactly.
early 19th century.
Exactly. And even before Islam, there was also the cultural aspect where the king was first the
Mm-hmm.
leader and everything. They could do anything for the king. Even
Mm-hmm.
there was that reference to the culture and then later reference to religion, even before colonial period. So the crimes in amongst the Hausas and was there are a lot of capital crimes. So it could be something has disrespecting the king. There are levels of disrespect. So if you go against the king's ordinance, you could be executed. Beyond murder, if you go against the tenets of the Quran, what we now know as Sharia law, tenets. So if you go against what the Quran says, like fornication, adultery, worshiping another god, um, so there are various levels to that, mainly looking at the ethics rather than the criminal justice. So there's that consideration of, oh, religiously, what does this say? Culturally, what does this say? For the eastern part, I would say they were more liberal, even as far back. You understand that even colonial period, this was one region that did not have like one supreme head or a king and all that. So there's that coordination of, let's start with the family units. So they could easily resolve issues of capital crime like murder and say, oh, appease the gods, bring articles like goat, ram. Oh, why don't you get married to one of our sisters? Because now you have someone, you have reduced our number in this family. So the criminal has to marry someone from the victim's family just to ensure there's procreation and all that. But in most cases, it was murder, cheating, like fornication, adultery. They don't execute for armed robbery. And that's one thing I want to make clear. They would rarely execute you because it's more of like warning you not to do it again. Another thing is betraying the community. Like maybe you're instigating inter-communal attacks. So it's that, oh, this army is coming in to kill our people and we're losing. So yes. So that's like local treason. Treason. So
betraying your local nations. And sometimes it could even be for things as simple as like farmland, right? Maybe some people
exactly.
encroach on your
Or
farmland,
want to
you know.
marry someone from their tribe. So you want to kill, like, like,
Really interesting.
then you move to colonial period and then it changes dynamics.
Yeah.
And then that's why we now consider manslaughter versus murder. So I've seen cases, and that's where I was not able of being careful because the court has to decide, like, oh, is this a manslaughter case? Because if you're accused of manslaughter, you would not be executed. Manslaughter does not warrant capital punishment. It is murder. So this is premeditated murder. So it's
Yes,
not
intent.
exactly. So it's not like, oh, I was on the farm, someone scared me, I thought it was an animal, so I shot and I killed the person. That's manslaughter. It's not like, oh, yes, I was angry with this person, so I poisoned this person. That's murder. So murder, and in some cases, armed robbery. Very few cases, armed robbery. So you see that the dynamics now change. They are not executing because it's left to the king's wife because they really have no business with that.
Yeah.
Moving to the post-colonial Nigeria, it
Yes.
becomes tricky because we have the civilian government and the military. During the military, it was a very important cause where you'd be executed for armed robbery. So now it changes in the dynamics. Capital punishment was the first tool. You better not be accused of armed robbery, or you better not be falsely accused of armed robbery because you would be executed during the military era. It was a joke. Murder, treason became very prominent. Drug trafficking became prominent for execution. Kidnapping also became prominent in the early days. Now, if we look at the civilian era from 1999 till date, there is now focus on treason and murder. So you can see how the dynamics change in the capital crimes and even in the way they are executed. So there's that change from stoning to now hanging to public execution. Like we discussed the Babbage executions, executions where people can see and try to create like a deterrence for others not to commit. So there is that evolution. So it's like, oh, you're lucky you were an armed robber in colonial era. If not, if you had done this in the military post-colonial era, you would have been executed. So it just shows that criminal justice is not static. And it looks at the eras, it looks at the timeline, looks at the political administration of that time to tell you like this is what is applicable. So it is not one-way street. If this is the law in 1999 or post-colonial era, it doesn't mean that it will fly in 2024 because of the changes.
This is really revealing. You are actually answering so many of the questions that I have, but you're also bringing up many other questions. So I'm curious to know, because you mentioned it and I was going to ask you, in addition to um, burying people with plants on their head, what other methods of executions has the state adopted, either in pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial societies? I know you've spoken about firing squads, but what else did we have, or what else do we practice in Nigeria? Do we have like lethal poison or electric chairs? Just, I mean, tell us.
So right now, I would say probably because of Nigeria's if you look at the core of Nigeria, we still have that religious, ethical alliance. Forget that we try to form, oh, this is what the law says and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And also looking at the technological advancements of the
Yeah.
Nigerian prison system. So executions are carried out in maximum prisons, looking at, and that's the likes of the Kirikiri maximum prison in Lagos.
Mm.
No execution will be carried out in a minimum prison because it is only these maximum prisons that have the gallows. So the gallows are
Mm.
where executions are carried out. And in these gallows, it is hanging. So I would say
Okay.
the most common form of execution in Nigeria is death by hanging. So even
Mm-hmm.
in courts, you see your sentence is to be
And
executed.
sorry, you're talking about the colonial era here, right? Death
No,
by hanging
post-colonial,
is very colonial or pre-colonial.
post-colonial, post-colonial.
Post-colonial, post-colonial. Oh, after the colonial period. Okay.
Yes, death by hanging. So you would see it even when they are declaring the sentence, you have been sentenced to death by hanging. This was also prominent in the colonial period.
Mm.
So you would see the letters from the colonial administrator being approved saying this person is to be executed by hanging. So yes, so in colonial and post-colonial Nigeria, hanging. For firing squad, it was more of a military era thing for you to be executed by firing squad. In pre-colonial, there was stoning. So you could be executed by stoning. And
Stoning.
that, yeah, so what we now look at as extrajudicial justice.
Yes, mob justice and all that stuff.
Exactly. But then it was a way of execution where
Mm.
you had to be executed by stoning, and then people stone you, and then even use of like their own form of hanging. It wasn't like they tie a rope to your neck, so they put like this wager of heavier loads that would like a balance wheel, so they put that
Mm.
on one side and then that rope pulls you up. So we can still say that's by hanging kind of. So
Mm.
that's in some areas in pre-colonial Nigeria.
So
But
people were not being drawn and quartered the way we read about in
it,
European history,
it
and
wasn't
maybe.
it wasn't like an established form of execution. It was just like bits and pieces in some
Mm.
communities, depending, we talked about how unique various communities were in terms of their laws. So it was
Yes.
just what the common ways were stoning, the hanging, the burning. You could also be executed by burning.
Burning was another one.
So they could
Mm.
just set you on fire and then
In
you
the
burn.
pre-colonial times, eh?
I've read like few articles, few
Mm.
archival materials that showed that. And for colonial, it was mainly hanging, synthetic
Mm.
hanging. For
Okay.
post-colonial, we had the firing squad, and we still have the hanging because the
Yeah.
gallows is still there. We have in Enugu, we have in the north, we have in Lagos. I think there are about 5 or 4 maximum prisons where the execution
Okay.
in Nigeria till date. Even if people talk about, oh, executions are not carried out, but we still have the secret executions. They are called
Mm.
secret executions. You don't hear about it.
Mm.
Yeah, the executions are still carried out.
But are executions by hanging still carried out today, or these are dated activities now?
No. And that's another thing I tried to show during my research,
Mm.
my field work, basically. So after like, how would I say, so many stress, jumping so many hurdles, I tried to go to the Kirikiri Maximum Prison and try to see what the gallows looks like today.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to jump so many hurdles. You really have to even get to the controller general to even get access.
Access to the place.
the prison, not even to the gallows yet.
Oh, why? Can you give me any reason why? What
So
did you deduce?
because, and I was I'm like, if me being in Nigerian is this hard, I don't want to even think about what's going to be for someone that is not in Nigeria or does not
Mm-hmm.
even speak like the common language, that's Yoruba in Lagos.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the idea was more of privacy
Mm-hmm.
and protecting the condemned criminals. So
Mm-hmm.
condemned criminals, for people that don't know, are people that have been sentenced to death. So those that are people who the courts have sentenced to be executed in whatever form.
Yeah.
Uh, so when I got there and I was like, oh, please, I really want, because I'm like, I went through this to get to the highest point to come into this space. I would like to
Mm-hmm.
see gallows where executions are carried out because I have pictures of what it looks like in colonial. So I wanted to
Okay.
see the
Compare
technology,
that.
yeah, and like maybe have
Mm.
like a chapter that shows the changes.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
the person in charge was like, nah, that is not going to happen. That he
Mm.
can discuss with me off record and give me like a pictorial. If I ask him what I ask him, he
Mm.
will tell me, but he would not open the gallows. Why? And I'm like, why? And he's like, if he does that, the prisoners that are on death row. So apparently, the prisoners on death row are their cells are close to the gallows, so
Mm.
they have to transport them and execute them.
Yes.
If it is opened, there is that sense that someone is about to be executed. They
Mm.
don't open it except someone is about to be executed. So immediately he said that, it just showed me. I didn't ask, but I knew that for you to say that, it means that it's still going on because you won't say,
Mm.
oh, if I open it, they know I'm about to execute. So it was,
Yes.
they open it when they want to clean up in preparation for an execution. So
Yes.
for the prisoners to know that, oh, once this is opened, someone is about to be executed, it means that they've lost cell members or
Mm.
cellmates that way.
Yes.
And that he said in the past, another thing he said was that in the past, once they open it, you see these prisoners calling their families, the families are calling human rights lawyers and
Mm.
organizations, and then you see them coming for the prisons, like, why do you want to execute? This is right of
Mm.
life, right of life, and all that. And it just showed that this is still going on. And I asked a question about secret executions, and it basically played the fifth that is not in that position to discuss secret. And
He
I'm like,
pled the fifth
okay.
in Nigeria.
So I'm like,
Yeah,
okay,
he just said, I'm not going to say anything.
I'm not gonna lose my job. I'm like, okay, you don't, some silences speak 1,000 words. So I'm like,
Mm,
okay, I get
100%. I want
the
to ask you two questions that arise from the conversation we're having. I had penned them down, but now maybe they've taken a bit of a different shape based on what you've just shared. One of them is theoretical. And what I'm curious about here is how does capital punishment, either as an idea or as a means of justice, how does it intersect with human rights, either in theory or practice? You can take a stab at it any way you want. So that's one question. And then the other question has to do with the effectiveness of capital punishment as a prevention mechanism. So advocates of capital punishment suggest that it is a good deterrent, while opponents say it does not prevent crime or more specifically violent crime, which seems to be one of the types of crime that attracts capital punishment. So it seems to me like each side's argument makes some sense. So can you tell me what you think and what does your research suggest? If you can take the two, and I can repeat any of the questions you want me to.
okay. So we'll start with the first one. That brings us to the global debate that surrounds capital punishment.
Okay.
Is today. So if you check the foundation of human rights, you would see that this came about from like 1945. And this was like just few years before independence for Nigeria in 1960.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah. And the colonial era lasted way more than that, way more than 50 years, 15
Mm-hmm.
years. So many things in the capital punishment modalities had been entrenched by the British.
Mm-hmm.
So when it came to 1945 with the United Nations, and from 1945 till date, the rise of international bodies like United Nations, human rights organizations like the Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and the likes. And they're looking at, let's even come to Africa, the African Union. They also have a branch that also talks about execution in African countries. So the global debates has divided countries into two. So we have the abolitionists and we have the retentionists. So the United Nations started something after its establishment based on human rights. If you look at the fundamental rights of man, the very first one is right to life.
Yeah.
And that's probably the most sacred of all fundamental rights, because if you are not alive, then you can't enjoy the other fundamental rights. And based on that is that idea that every human is entitled to that right to life. And no organization, no government has the right to take or deny any human of their right to life. So if you execute someone, whether the person is guilty or not, then you are denying that person the fundamental right to life. So that's the Human Rights Foundation. And then organizations are like, yes, this is it. We have the fundamental human rights everywhere. Countries are adopting it, independent countries are showing it forward. Former colonies and former powers are showing it and saying, yes, these are the fundamental human rights. And if you are respecting other elements of these rights, like right to expression, right to religion, right to association, so why are you not respecting to the full extent the right to life? And since you are no longer colonies or being colonized, you are independent bodies. So you should also learn that while you were under the control of these powers, you were restricted and denied some rights. So why do you want to deny your citizens this fundamental right to life? That created the idea of retentionists and abolitionists. So the abolitionist countries are countries that thought about it and abolished capital punishments in their countries, from their constitutions, and everything. While the retentionists are countries that still uphold the capital punishment, which Nigeria is one of such countries that still upholds the capital punishment. So I would say that's the idea behind it. Now, when it comes to the philosophy or the schools of thought of these retentionists and the abolitionists, it is going to answer your second question. So for the abolitionists, it's like, yeah, we've looked at the statistics and we've seen that despite the fact that we had capital punishment, it did not reduce crime.
Okay.
So why do we need it? Since the deterrent effect is not being felt. So
yeah, because people are still committing the same crimes that
exactly. So it's not
killing
like
people for.
Exactly. So it's not like murder just vanished because now we're executing people.
Yes.
So why do we need to keep it? It's like, okay, let's take it out. And that's one of the ideas for abolitionists, taking it out. The deterrence effect is like lost or not even visible.
Yeah.
For the abolitionists, it's like the idea of, and that's something I also got from interviews, because I got to interview some former military officers because I wanted to understand the military aspect. I interviewed some old people who experienced colonial era criminal justice system and post-colonial justice system. And I also interviewed scholars and judges. And from that interview, I will tell you categorically that about 90% supported Nigeria as a retentionist country.
Okay.
And the idea is based on two ideas, basically. The first one is the idea of lesser of two evils.
Okay.
Because I tried to let them know what the abolitionists say and why.
Yes.
And it was just like,
how is it a lesser of two evils?
Okay,
I'm curious.
so
I would like you to maybe just shed a bit more light on that.
That was what and it was like, okay, so if we abolish capital punishment, what's to say that crime is not going to increase? What's to say that the level of murder is not going to increase? Because now we have capital punishment and there are still some people that still commit capital crimes.
True.
So we're saying the deterrence effect is not at its peak, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Because let's say, for example, 100 people want to commit murder, but because they've seen the military execute people at Babbage or firing squad or hanging, or see their pictures in the newspapers, the disgrace to the family, it could deter, even if it is just one. Obviously that crime. But if you take it out and abolish it, and it's like, oh, if you kill someone, you're just going to be sentenced to life imprisonment, and there's possibility that you'll be granted pardon after 20 years. It's like, oh, okay. Or, oh, you can escape this. So it's that idea of the lesser of two evils. Like, if you take it out, what's to say it's not going to be worse than what we have? And another thing is, like, you want to abolish capital punishment. Who is telling you to abolish capital punishment? Now, and this is where the idea from the older generation, and I think I now understand why Nigeria still retains the capital punishment. I would say it's the PTSD of the colonial era.
Okay.
So for the older ones, like those that were 80s and older, for the who were in their 80s and older, and for most of them, I had to like have translators for the ones I didn't speak, but the ones I understood the local dialects, I allowed them to just express themselves. And it was the idea of, who is telling us to abolish? It is the white people, or like they say, Oyinbo, that is telling us to abolish. Who is at the head of the who are those in charge of the United Nations? Who are those in charge of this talking about right to life and everything? It is the white people. They were the ones that came in during the colonial era and killed our people or enforced this capital punishment in the first place, beyond restorative justice angle, but more of like a retributive justice angle, because they wanted to show. Or we had cases where British people committed murder during the colonial period, but they were not executed. Well, in our cases, if a Nigerian did that, it would be executed. So why are we listening to them now? If it was a Nigerian or a Black person that was telling us to abolish it, probably we would listen and abolish it. But it's like, you did this to me and you are coming to tell me. So it's that idea of neo-colonialism, I would say. Like,
yes.
that idea.
I think Vivian Salehana talks about this extensively. I read her book when I was doing some work about prisons, and she mentioned this neo-coloniality as a thing. And I think one of her main arguments, first of all, is, and it may not sit with where your own view is about, criminal justice broadly. But if I understood her correctly, it seemed to me she was saying that, first of all, retaining this, criminal justice system that has its foundations in Western philosophies of how to go about justice, retributive justice, and all of that, is a form of new colonialism, and we need to change that. And so when I hear you speaking about these perspectives of capital punishment, I can definitely, relate with that, about people thinking, oh, here we go again. First of all, you brought this whole idea, rooted in your own ideas of what justice means. Not that we're not punishing people or whatever, but we did it for certain reasons. You have changed all of that, instituted this thing, and now you're coming to give us reasons and say, hey, don't do it anymore. It's just like some people who argue from a religious perspective, you were the one who brought Western religions to us. You brought Christianity, and now you're telling us about atheism. You're saying, no, forget about those things and all of that. So at each point, it's like our own personal views here don't matter. It's what you guys think we should be doing.
Yeah. So, and it also extends to the idea of state sovereignty. So being like, we're now independent, you don't have to tell us what to do. When we get to that point where we want to abolish it, or we decide that, okay, we want to abolish it, then we would abolish it. And this extends to the prisons itself. So it's like, okay, when we abolish it, so what's going to be the alternative punishment for someone that commits capital crime? So let's say someone that executes, that murders someone. So a criminal that commits the crime of murder. So what are the alternatives? And I'm like, oh, For abolishing it, countries that have abolished capital punishment, it's life imprisonment. And it's like we have the capital punishment in place and our prisons are overpopulated.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot even take it. Like we have issues of overpopulation with the decadence of the prison system. How do
Now we
we
have to deal with the expense of feeding you as a prisoner. If you fall sick, we have to take
exactly
care of you. All these
exactly?
interesting things.
And
But
do
if we kill you, you're gone.
we have the facilities to take more and have you
Mm,
stay there? Because it's like now the government is now being punished for your crime also because they have to take care of you for the rest of your life.
yes.
The state of the prisons is not even going to encourage that as an alternative. And it's saying that
Mm,
you have to understand the uniqueness or the terrain of various geographical locations. You can't compare the United States or Finland.
mm,
We've seen pictures of how some very developed countries, their prisons look like. Countries like Finland, countries like New Zealand. You can't compare that to prisons in Nigeria. And also looking at the population itself, like the population of criminals or populations of condemned criminals now, which will probably increase if it is abolished. What happens to being able to properly reform them? Because now you're sentencing the person to life imprisonment, which means the person is going to die in prison, right?
mm-hmm.
So do we have the facilities to take care of that or handle that? It's not like if we abolish, is the United Nations going to provide funds to build special prisons for those that commit capital crimes? So
Mm,
it's just, and it's really eye-opening to understand that, okay, so this is where the angles you guys are coming from. And despite the fact that human rights, and they're like, if you know you don't want to be denied of the right to life, then don't commit a crime where you've obviously denied someone else their right to life. So the idea of an eye for an eye, like
mm-hmm.
is you kill someone, then you should be killed.
Mm,
So that's it. Like you kill someone, you should be killed. So why do you get to enjoy mercy when you did
mm.
not extend that same mercy to the person you killed, or you murdered? So
Mm.
you did
So
this.
let me ask you a question and maybe put you on the spot at the same time. Would you classify yourself as an abolitionist or a retentionist or somewhere in between?
I would say in between if I understand the ideas behind it. I think we have to take each crime case by case. I
Mm,
would say it should be like a general thing because some people are just, it's maybe just circumstances of life that made them commit such capital crimes. We've seen people that are reformable or that have been reformed, and we've seen people that are just adding criminals. So let's take, for example, someone that decides that I'm just going to go on a killing spree of killing children.
mm.
What if I grant a person pardon and it goes back out there and continues again?
Continues.
But there are also cases where there are people that commit murder, maybe in the fleet of anger, or maybe they've been cheated, or maybe someone did something to them and they are genuinely sorry. So I would say for me, when it comes to capital punishment, I think I stand on the basis of looking at the case itself, the
To
uniqueness of that
determine.
to determine. But generally, I would say the right to life is very important. And looking as a Nigerian, there are some ways you can put, there are far worse punishment you can give your children or rather than flogging them. You get.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we
Mm-hmm.
use that idea and extend it to capital punishment, there are things that are worse than death. I've seen cases where people say, oh, this person did this to me. I don't want them to be executed. I want them to be
Mm,
alive to experience and suffer. So I think
mm,
there are ways you can also go about delivering judgments without executing.
mm,
Basically. So I would say because it's a traumatic experience. Looking at the archives and the way they're executed, whether it's by firing squad, whether it's by hanging, whether it's by electrocution and lethal injection. And like you asked, Nigeria, do we do lethal injection? No. Why?
mm,
I would say we don't have the technology. It's there
mm-hmm.
that by lethal injection, but we don't have the
Oh, so there
facilities
is a law. There is a law that someone
that
can be
you can,
executed
yeah,
by lethal injection,
yeah,
but the
yeah,
infrastructure is not just there.
not just there.
Got it.
So,
Got it.
and then that's why most judges or the judgments, you just see death by hanging, death by, because
Mm,
I've not seen any case where the judge, the sentence will read death by lethal injection, because
mm,
we don't have the, because
yeah.
you need to put so many things in place, the medical personnel in place, the articles involved, what's going to happen
Mm,
to the body after, like all that has to be put in place. How much is it going to cost the prison
mm-hmm,
system to buy this little injection, acquire that, pay for the services of those that would do that, those that will be present. So it's like that. This is way too much money. And
mm,
at the end of the day, you're still going to die, right? So whether it's by hanging or lethal injection, at least they have been executed. So for lethal injection, I've not read, at least as at the time of this recording, I've not read whether
mm.
it's lethal injection.
No, fair enough. And what you speak about brings up, a question for me about human rights, because I know we have human rights laws in Nigeria, but again, obviously we have capital punishment laws as we've been discussing. So if my reading of our conversation is correct, it seems to me that capital punishment laws in Nigeria take precedence over human rights laws. If I'm misreading that, you can correct me. But my question here is, are there instances where human rights has been successfully used to truncate a sentence of capital punishment, whether it's from colonial or post-colonial times, even though that sentence has fully been passed, so to speak? Maybe you can just shed light with one or two
Yes,
examples.
I would say that the human rights angle trumps the capital punishment
Oh,
sentence.
interesting. So my perspective is the other way
Yeah,
around, actually. So
yeah.
in
So
Nigeria, human rights. Sorry,
currently,
what perspective is this? Is this the from like the judge
post-colonial.
of the law or the public
Okay,
or the government? Whose view are
yeah.
you talking about here?
So we're going to go the threefold institutions. So
Okay.
at the court has the duty or the responsibility to deliver judgment based on the
Hmm.
tenets of the Constitution. So
Okay.
you've killed someone, and maybe the law says after looking at the evidence, you're guilty, therefore you are sentenced to death by hanging. When that sentence is gonna be carried out, it's not the business of the court. So
Mm.
now you're taken to the prisons. Now, the prisons would have you and house you and take care of you
Yeah.
up to the point where that execution will be delivered. There are
Mm.
so many cases in Nigeria right now where people have been sentenced to death by hanging and they die without being executed. So you could even be in the prisons for
Mm.
70 years, and meanwhile, that's why I said there's some punishments that are even more severe than being killed. So imagine waking up every day for 70 years and you're like, is this the day? Is today going to be the day I'm going to be executed?
Yes.
So, and then we have the place of the most important part. Now, the court has delivered the sentence. Now you're in the prison as a condemned criminal. But you need the government, you need the governor's, what we call the governor's assents. So the governor has to sign for your execution to be carried out.
Okay.
If the governor, the sitting governor of that state, does not sign your execution, you will not be executed. You'll only be sentenced. But
Mm.
doesn't say you have to be killed in 2 weeks. Like this was applicable in the colonial era. So you see cases where in the sentence says you should be executed, blah, blah, blah. And then in some cases you see as they're signing the date when they would execute you. But
Okay.
in post-colonial, you could be in the prisons as a condemned criminal for years and not be executed. When I went to the prisons, I had conversations with some of other inmates, not condemned criminals, and they say yes, there are cases where that although the condemned criminals have their own wing, I would say, where they
Hmm.
are all kept. They don't not like they have cells with the other criminals. And that's a place of the governor's assent, and that's where I would say the human rights angle trumps the sentence, the capital punishment sentence.
How does that work?
So I would look at it from the religious, the political, and the ethical angle.
Okay.
Most governors would not want to sign the execution of a Nigerian citizen.
Mm.
It is the idea of, let's say, for example, while the governor is going through the statistics and it's like, oh, we have 500 condemned criminals on death row in these prisons. Oh, we want to decluster. They would always avoid it. Oh, I'm not. Rather, they will grant pardon.
Mm-hmm.
In cases where a new governor comes in or a new president comes in, and then it's like, oh, we're going to grant governor's pardon or the prerogative of mercy to 5 condemned criminals,
Okay.
or 30 or to 35. I know it happened during Obasanjo's time. I remember that time. It happened during Obasanjo's time where he granted pardon to some on death row. It happens a
Okay.
lot in Lagos. It happens a lot in so many states. They
I
don't
think I've seen a number of news reports where they say this governor or that
exactly,
governor assented to, commuting certain
exactly,
people's sentences or something like that.
exactly. So if they don't commute your sentence to just like this, sometimes they even let you go. So imagine
Mm,
someone that is 79 years old and is on death row.
mm,
Or someone that maybe he transformed his life, became like a religious person, like a pastor in the prison, became like an
mm,
imam. Like, oh, based on your character, the change that we've seen,
mm,
how we can let you go. And the prison officers or the prison wardens are the ones that recommend and say, oh, this person, yes, or this person has changed, this person does this, so I think we should free this person. So that is more likely to happen than for a governor to sign. Now, looking at the political angle, it is that idea of if the governor signs and then maybe the newspaper picks it up the next day and says, oh, the governor signed the execution of 10 condemned prisoners, that could affect the political ambition of that governor. And
mm,
that's the idea for them. It's like, this looking at the religious aspect, and that's where the religious and the
mm.
secular Nigerians will be like, we can't vote for this person is wicked. Oh,
Cold-blooded.
exactly. You can't come in for the second term. You can't advance. And there's that stereotypical idea, oh, this was that governor that killed. They,
Mm,
a typical Nigerian will not remember it was the court that handed out the sentence. It's
yeah,
like they're the one that killed.
that did
Ah,
it.
exactly. Especially when you look at maybe the people involved, and it's like maybe a young person or an older person. It's like, oh, you killed an old
Mm,
man. Why would you do that? Don't you have your own children too? Why did you kill this young? So that
mm,
political angle of not wanting to lose potential electoral votes
mm,
uh, in the future, not just for that particular governor, but for the party in general.
mm,
I be like, oh, the party where this government is affiliated, we don't want to have anything to do with them in the future and all that. That's the political
mm,
angle. The ethical angle or the religious angle is for like a sitting governor who is like a Christian, is like, I don't have the power to take someone's life, so I will not do it. My conscience can't take it. I have my own kids, I have my own family. How do I live with myself, having signed for someone to be killed and all that? So
yes.
most governors do not sign it. So that's why the courts have delivered the judgments that you should be executed by hanging. A lot of them live informal life sentences.
Mm.
End of the
So
day.
the governors are just kicking the bucket down the road, or are hoping that
Exactly.
somebody kicking the ball down the road
When
and
I
hoping
finish
somebody
my
else is gonna.
tenure, yeah, when I finish
Yeah,
my tenure, let the next governor deal with
yeah.
that.
Let someone else deal with it.
I'm not gonna deal with it. The only
Mm,
case that I think I don't I can't remember the governor in 2006. There was a governor that, or 2016, there was a governor as recent as 2016.
mm,
There was a governor that signed the execution of 5 condemned prisoners, and that created chaos in that state. So it was in one of those eastern states. If you look it up, maybe if you just Google the last execution in Nigeria, it will show there are a lot that happened, but that was very fundamental because it geared up reactions, not just
yeah.
in it, but in Nigeria and with
Mm,
human rights organizations, both locally and internationally. And I
yeah.
think that thing is that human rights organizations now focus on retentionist countries or states. So you
Okay.
have, like Human Rights Watch. We have Human Rights
Amnesty
Watch.
International.
Exactly. And then we have the Nigerian branches. So these ones are tasked with the duty of ensuring that such executions do not happen.
Mm,
So, and that was what the prison, the controller of that Kirikiri prison was trying to explain that if I should try to open the gallows, I'm going to get calls. You would see TV stations and radio stations popping up in front of these prisons. Like, do you really, let's see the face of the person that is going to carry out this execution. So it's like, you can't do it. So it's like extending to presidential power, the plea, to the United Nations, to bringing in like international media houses like CNN, and is now putting eyes like, oh, this prison wants to execute. So it's like, okay, you can't do that.
Yeah.
So like the lens is now focused on retentionist countries. So I think that kind of restricts the implementation of the judgment over the human rights angle. So even though Nigeria has not like formally abolished it from the constitution, it's still in the constitution. Has not abolished it from the constitution or its laws or anything. Even as recent as last month, there was a case in one of the southwestern states, where a young university student was sentenced to death by hanging. But I doubt that person is going to be executed anytime soon, or would ever be executed. Because despite the fact that the court has passed the judgment, there is literally no governor that wants that. So it's like, let the next governor deal with it. So imagine going through like 50 years and you're just in the prisons. And I think some of these condemned criminals know that. And I was told, or I've read also, that the condemned criminals are the most pampered in the prisons.
Interesting.
And that was a shocker for
me.
Why
is that the case? Why are they the most pampered?
Exactly, because I was expecting like this should be the people that should be dealt with in the prisons. And it's the idea of, one, they are like the babies of these human rights organizations or institutions. None of them make a phone call to maybe their families, or they get in contact with these human rights organizations and they are told they're being maltreated. That's going to create problems. So they get the highest ration of food, they get the best cells, that because they don't want the trouble with the human rights organizations. Secondly, that idea of you might be dead tomorrow, so enjoy the time you have here. So for being executed, let us take care of you. They are the ones that are the chubby ones, well taken care of. They're the ones that they don't have to struggle. They're the ones. So it's like there's that comfort they try to give them, so that they are not really thinking about the hour of death and quote. But in most cases, they are not executed. So it's like you're living in the prisons for the rest of your life.
You're living la vida without the loca.
Exactly.
you're living a good life, just that you're not free.
Yeah, so that's
it is really, really, really revealing what you share. And I like that point, about how they are trying to make them comfortable, and also the effect of the negative spotlight that comes with capital punishment. I have two questions I want to ask you that are related to this. The first one has to do with political intersections of capital punishment with society. You already spoke about how in the colonial era, it might have been possible, or not that it might have been possible. There are instances that the literature shows you where a white person, a British guy, or European doesn't get capital punishment for the same crime that a native Black Nigerian would, be hung for. So can we talk a bit more about the political intersections of capital punishment with Nigerian society? So like, how has it been used as a tool for power in the post-colonial era? For instance, we have political actors maybe using capital punishment as a tool against perceived enemies, that kind of thing. And the other question, maybe related to this, is like public spectacle in terms of ordering, how capital punishment is perceived in society. Has there been a particular way it has been presented to the public? So the public firings at the Bar Beach, for instance, my understanding is that it used to attract large crowds. People would come and watch. So was it like a show people were coming to see, or people were just coming there to express their sympathy with people who were about to be killed? What is your own, view of how um what the public has seen, how the public sees capital punishment, even going to things like the way it's presented in movies or how it is presented in newspapers, the media generally, and then also the earlier question about the political intersections, maybe people using it as a tool against their enemies.
Okay. Thank you for that. So looking at the first one, I think that's still connected to my previous answer. So no, I would say in comparison to the colonial instances where the British could have that racial bias against the indigenous, against Nigerians, and then you see a British person going scot-free for the same crime a Nigerian would be executed. I would say that is not, let's look at post-colonial, that is not permissible or visible in post-colonial Nigeria. Why? Because we have the place of the courts. There is that, once you get to the courts, there is that respect for the judicial course for the judicial law to run its course, basically. So you would not see like let's say political parties or bodies trying to take advantage of that and saying that, oh, let this person be executed. Because whether you do that on a personal level or on a political level or whatever, it would always get back to you as someone that is approving that. Now remember that it's the governor's assent that is the final, that declares the finality of the execution. So because such governors or governors generally do not want that tag of being responsible for the execution of condemned criminals, you don't see them use that. They use other things that are not legal. So you see cases of assassination, silencing, like they say, you silence the person while the person is in the police net or in the cell. But when it gets to the legal aspects of trying to like maneuver the law in terms of capital punishment to your own bidding, it's not possible. In the British era, yeah, it was, because obviously it was the colonial powers. But in post-colonial, it's not. And there's that idea of we're all Nigerians. So it's my brother, my sister, the idea. They'll probably do that in an illegal way, like, or maybe pay someone in the cell to like, why don't you do this to this person? Why don't you find a way to kill this person? But going through the legal aspects, which capital punishment is, you won't see that. Then for the
What about public perception?
Yeah, for the public perception, I'll look at it from the military and then the civilian angle. During the military era, I would say that capital crimes reduced a lot. The deterrence effect was very visible, especially based on the archival records I've gone through.
Okay.
And why? I would say it was because of the public executions that were carried out. And now you understand that when the military gets involved, there is nothing like mercy, there is nothing like, it is like obey before command. So I was able to interview former military officers during that era of public execution, as of police officers that are retired now, and try to like ask them like, what was the scene like during this executions, like the Babbage executions. And I also interviewed a few people that went there to witness one or two executions, because I really wanted to understand, like, it's like watching like a gory movie where you close your eyes and you literally went there.
You went there.
Knowing what was going to happen, like what was the idea behind it. So for those who witnessed it, it was an idea of shaming the person.
Okay.
And beyond shaming the person, it was also shaming the family. And that just shows me at the communal level, you know, when they say, oh, don't tarnish my image, don't tarnish my name, and that. And it's like, oh, let's go see this person.
Yeah.
And because now there's now that tag of, oh, your surname, is that your surname? The family of
This person.
criminals, robbers, murderers, and all that. And so they go there because they want to see there is that, based on the precedence of an eye for an eye. This was what you did. You were the one that
Mm-hmm.
killed the person that we saw in the newspaper, or that was terrorizing our neighborhood with armed robberies. Or you see people that went to steal from that bank that killed that child. So let us see you be executed too. So
Mm-hmm.
because it's like demanding your own pound of flesh.
Yes.
So it's like they're going there to see it. Because I was like, was it not gory? Was it not like no? Because it now became like a carnival in quotes, because you see
Mm-hmm.
lots of people, you see a lot of people coming to witnesses, and it's like they're chatting, are you not going for that execution tomorrow? Because they want to see that justice is delivered. It's
It's
like,
done.
so it's like, oh, the military is doing something to reduce crime rates. Because the idea of an F and I, we've seen cases where, oh, this armed robber, this gang, they've been terrorizing, they've been killing people, they've been stealing from us. We're scared to go out at night. We're scared to let our children go to school on their own because we don't know what's going to happen. Now let's go see that those responsible are going to be eliminated, so that at least we can get some sanity and some peace for ourselves. So they go there to like have like, first, let me see it, not that someone is telling me about it. So that's for those that were involved in, like, maybe those that shot the criminals. Um, I don't have evidence of those that actually shot, because they'll tell you that that's like top secret. Like,
Mm-hmm.
even those that were going to carry out the execution, they don't know they're going to carry it out until, like, it's like, okay, now I'll wait for this execution. You are going to shoot first pole, second pole. You just go there, you mount, you shoot, and that's it.
So the military or the executioners wouldn't even know that that was the task they were about to get
No,
involved in. So it was almost a very top secret mission
top
approach
secret,
kind of thing.
top secret. They said most
Mm,
cases it's just 2 or 3 people that know about it. The person that is going to
mm,
do the actual shooting, the head of that unit, whether it's the military or the police, and then the person that is giving the order from the top level. So nobody, even the family, nobody, even the best colleagues, nobody knows.
mm,
I was trying so hard to like say, can I interview an executioner? So it
mm,
stops mainly to protect for safety concerns, because
mm.
if word gets out that you
This is the
executed,
person.
yeah, the gang that escaped or the families of
Mm,
executed might want to retaliate, even if it's not at them directly, it might be at their
mm.
family
The
members,
family members.
but it's trying to protect. So the public perception was, yes, these executions need to take place to create a sense of peace, stability, and crime control. And it's like we are protecting your family, you're protecting your community in the best
Mm,
way possible. That's for the military, because the military does not, there's no temper justice, the mercy.
yeah.
It's like, you did this is your punishment, and that's it.
Mm,
But for the civilian, we see the sentiments, we see the, like I explained, the political angle, the ethical,
mm,
religious angle, and then we see how that also comes down to the public perception. So people that are maybe religiously aware, you see the older generation saying, just forgive, don't let this happen. So there's that idea, that there's that forgiveness, yeah,
mm.
idea of like, you can forgive and let it go. But so I'll say it's a mixed reaction, and there are those that are like, no, an eye for an eye. You commit the crime, you do the time. Basically.
Yeah.
So I'll
Fair
say it's
enough. Fair enough. So I know our time is almost up. And I want to squeeze 3 questions into the last 5 minutes. You can take a stab at them however you want. The first one has to do with maybe your own philosophical conceptions of how nation building is linked to the criminal justice system more broadly, or specifically capital punishment. Are there any connections between capital punishment as a system of justice or the criminal justice system more broadly and efforts at building a nation? I asked this question because even at the beginning, you gave some example of how some societies in the eastern part or southeastern part of Nigeria, for example, had processes to maintain social equilibrium. So if you committed a crime, capital punishment or a severe punishment will not be the first thing. And if I think about my own society, where I come from, my village community, actually, even till date, if someone steals, you're going to be exiled from the village. I think it's maybe 3 years or something like
Wow.
that. And you can't come
Okay.
into the village. Yes. So you have to leave everything. And anybody who is seen associating with you, is going to be in trouble, that kind of thing. And even till date, people, they do that, and it helps. So everybody knows somehow that if you're going to steal, you better not get caught, that kind of thing. So that helps to build, as a community, sense of commitment towards one another, fairness, and all of that. But that's that example. So in your own view, you know, do you see any connections between capital punishment and the idea of building a nation, which is something Nigeria is currently trying to do? So that's the first question. The second one is more around your own approach to history in terms of method. Like, you've spoken about some of the sources that you've relied on, but I'm also curious to know about the kind of sources you wish you had access to that you still haven't gotten. You've spoken about the executioner, for example, now, but are there any other kind of sources you'd have liked? You've spoken already a lot about your use of oral history, so that's clear, but just more of like your approach to history and sources. And the last question is, what do you think legal history can tell about the history of a people? So, in the course of your research, what are some of the things you've learned about Nigeria that um, might not have come to light, if you weren't studying capital punishment or
Yeah.
criminal justice? So, those are my last three questions, and you can answer each or all, any of them.
Wow. I was expecting for them to be linked together, so I'll just have one answer for everything. But
You can take a stab. If you can only do one, that's fine.
okay. So quickly for the first question, nation building and capital punishment. I would
Mhm.
say that there is a progression of capital punishment, even the modalities, even the crimes, even the methods involved in capital punishment, even the justice system, the judgments, the reactions of the people, and the political reactions too. I would say they align with the nation building elements that we see, or nation building theories and ideas, the ideology behind it. Why I say that is because whether we like it or not, change is one thing that is constant. And it might not happen as quickly as we want it to happen, but in various chuckles or in various bits, we see how nation building, how capital punishment helps to buttress nation building. I would say, in terms of examples or instances, we see how the Nigerian government, whether it's the legislative, whether it's the judiciary or the executive, are willing or cannot avoid the place of the human rights tendencies or even the global debates. One person cannot decide what the constitution is going to be. That's why the fact that people that still think eye for an eye, this person should be executed, it doesn't mean that they're going to do what they want to do. They still have to succumb to what is going on in terms of nation building and ensuring that there's more of like crime control, crime reduction. What are we doing to go about that? Respecting the life of Nigerian citizens and upholding the fundamental right to life, putting structures in place to ensure that people are protected, they feel safe, and overall law and order is pertinent or visible in the Nigerian system. For the second question of my sources, okay,
Yes, sources.
oh my God. Um, I tell people that if you are doing a research on Nigeria and you're going through, like, let's say archival sources, and then you find useful information that is going to help maybe with your research, the joy that comes with it is sometimes more than winning like $1 million for me.
I can relate.
Like, wow.
Can definitely relate.
Finally, yes. this is evidence. This is something I can hold on to because, and why I say that is, unfortunately, the maintenance culture in Nigeria, the archives, our research centers is it's terrible, or it's not up to par as you'd expect.
Understood. Very
And
well
so
understood.
you have to dig deep. You really have to dig deep, and not just like, for example, I can't just go to the archives and then say I want to look for sources, and then my search word is capital punishment. I would probably not.
Mm,
So you would have to think. I literally had a book, a short notepad where I would probably, I'm sleeping or I'm moving, and I just remember one word just strikes me. I just write it down so that when next like
mm,
sentence, I can use that to also search for.
mm,
So I wish that the these centers were the maintenance culture, even right from the colonial or post-colonial period. I
mm.
wish it was maintained there. I can't say I wish it is maintained now because it will take years for those who need it to use it. Now, for me, I wish
Yes.
that was in existence because then I would be able to get sources as regards executioners. Because
Yeah.
know how that the evidence or the papers, will not have been declassified by the 21st century for things that happened in the 20th century or
Mm,
so I wish I had sources that showed experiences because I've seen some countries, because I went to the UK, the
mm.
Q one at Q, the
The
National
National
Archive,
Archives are queue.
and I saw some executioners' entries, their diaries, and experiences
Interesting.
from former some British colonies. And
Mm.
when I got to Nigeria and there was nothing. And I'm like, I wish I
Crickets.
could just pick this diary and put it
Mm,
in Nigeria. So I wish that was there, the executioners,
mm.
because I feel that would be very important to the angle of, was I really made to do this? Am I doing this in terms, or I did not agree? Did I align with the views of executing this person or not? So I would have
Yeah.
loved to see that. And also the mental health aspect too. Secondly, I would have loved to see more media clips or clippings like the newspapers, because that was mainly what was in existence then. So I wish the newspapers were there for me to like go through, because the journalists are very important to historical analysis because they are able to ask those questions that I was not alive then to ask the people that were.
If I may ask, is there a specific period you're looking for? The reason I'm asking is, well, not too recently, but I did come across a set of court documents within that were salvaged by the Endangered Archives Program of the British
Okay.
Library. Um,
Oh,
yeah, I can share that with you, but
mine is like late 19th
let's, eh,
19th
eh,
century and early 20th century. So let's say
yes,
1880 to like 1920 kind of.
yes.
Yeah, so
So
that's it.
you've seen those records, yeah?
So
Oh, okay.
so
So
if
I
you
think
have
these
a
record
link,
these records will be useful for you. I've tried to look at them when I was trying to look up some information because I was interested in maybe if there were cases of people who maybe stole um telegraphic equipment, technology equipment, and were charged to court. I'd seen one, but I was like, okay, let me see if I can find more. But my
and
so I can share that with you, and then you can check it out and see if it's going to be
yeah,
useful, but it
please.
cuts across several parts of southwestern Nigeria.
Oh,
Some of it is in Yoruba as well, but handwritten notes, you can
yeah,
check it out and see.
yeah. I would really
Mm,
appreciate that. So yeah. So the media sources and then the personal accounts of the executioners. And I wish that the accounts of the condemned families, because there's that shame that comes with, oh, my dad was executed, my grandpa was executed for murder. So you really
yes.
have an account where people want to share that, yes, even if I want to conduct an interview and maybe I announce it on social media that, oh, if during the colonial period, any of your family members or someone that's
Nobody's
um
gonna come up. Nobody's gonna come forward because of the
exactly,
stigma that is attached
exactly.
to
So
that.
I wish people were willing to share more of their experiences
Mm,
and not that, because I understand it, but unfortunately it's a very dicey topic. So yes. wish that. For the last question, your last question, remind me,
Yeah,
please.
it was really just a general question. What do you think legal history can tell us about the history of a people? Like you mentioned, most
Okay.
people talk about political, economic,
Yeah.
nobody talks about legal history. So now that you're neck deep in it, what do you think we can learn from it? Anything general, it can just be one word, one
So
line aspect.
I would say that just boils down to why I chose to focus on this field, because sometimes I'm stressed or I'm frustrated or from just the hindrances and the limitations that come up with this kind of research. And the consolation is, if I was doing something else, I'll probably have just given up. If it was economic history, sorry to the economic historians, but I'm terrible. I don't find it interesting at all. So I think because of the interest that it stirs up in me, it helps me to dig deep. So for legal issue, I'll say it has helped me to see that Nigeria did not, the issue of Nigeria did not really come, the legal issue of Nigeria did not really come into focus in the colonial period, but,
Mm,
dates way back to pre-colonial. And it helps me to understand the uniqueness of the legal dimensions in various areas in Nigeria. And it helps me to understand that whether we like it or not, there is the connection between the legal and the cultural
mm,
in Nigeria. And so because of that, we cannot, and we here is like Nigerians or Africans, we cannot compare ourselves to the legal provisions of the West, because I would, sorry to anyone I may offend, there is that cultural dimension is literally not existent in the West. It's visible, but the diversity, I would say diversity there, the diversity of the cultural dimensions is not as visible in the West as it is in, let's just say, even Nigeria.
mm.
So I would say that even when we talk about the East, there are still dimensions of
Yeah.
Eastern. Talk about the
Mm,
West, there are still dimensions. So looking at how the law, the legal and the cultural intertwine when it comes to criminal justice is something that has been very eye-opening. And it has shown me not to accept the literature, that not just face value, don't just accept
yeah.
face value what you read. Go deep down, the oral sources should back it up,
Mm.
archival records should back it up. And I wish I didn't have to travel to or consult the UK
UK
archive.
archives to find
Well,
out about Nigeria.
exactly, because sometimes, unfortunately, because of the language barrier or something, some things might be lost in translation.
Mm-hmm.
Things might not. I've seen cases where I've read books on capital punishment, and then they write someone's name, and because I'm Yoruba, I understand that. I'm like, oh, what's this person trying to say? So when they say
Mm.
I'm like, oh, but this is not how it is spelled.
Yes.
If you can identify such little mistakes, so imagine the ones
Mm.
in translation.
And those
And
things make a big difference in what you're taking
exactly,
away, right?
exactly. And finally, I would say that it has shown me how legal history is very important, even in current global debates or
Yeah.
discussion. Because we're talking about capital punishment as far back as pre-colonial or colonial Nigeria. Well,
Mm-hmm.
that's the issue that is being talked about in the United Nations. We have special rapporteurs that take
Mm.
human rights organizations, and it just shows you that nothing ends. History continues. There is no, oh, history is just the study of the past. Nah, there is that element of like, you want to know why this is happening. This is why it is happening, and I
Yeah.
think to avoid generalizations. I've picked up some textbooks that maybe say death penalty in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like your examples are just picking one country in East Africa.
Yes.
And so
And
that
you use
affects
that to represent the whole continent, which is not true.
exactly. And that just affects what I'm trying to say, maybe West Africa or maybe Nigeria to be specific. Because what you're saying,
Mm.
and then you say, oh, death penalty in Africa was this. This was why people were executed. But that is not why people were executed in Nigeria.
Yeah.
So I think generalizations is something that I have struggled with the literature. So I wish beyond just writing or researching, I wish scholars pay closer attention to the uniqueness of various areas in Africa, the cultural dimensions, and how they are linked to the legal history. So yeah, that's it.
Wow, thank you very much, Oyin. I think that is a fine place to leave it.
Yeah.
I really
Believe me,
learned
I think
so
we'll
much.
continue. I believe me, I think we'll just continue. So yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank
I've learned so much, and I feel like we can keep talking and talking and talking about your work, which I think is really fascinating. So I'm looking forward to the opportunity to have you on the podcast again, so that we
As
can talk
long
some
as it's
more.
the same topic, yeah.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And then you can share more light. Maybe there are new things you've discovered in the course of your work and other approaches you've taken to what you're currently doing with capital punishment, crime, and legal history. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a really enjoyable experience. At least like you get to talk about what you're just writing, reading, and interact. So yeah, this was great.
You did justice. You did absolute justice to it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
So friends, that's our show for today. My guest was Oyinade Adekunle, who is an assistant lecturer of history at the University of Lagos in Nigeria, and also a doctoral candidate at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. If you have any questions about what we've discussed today, the comments are open, so feel free to put your questions there. And of course, if you enjoyed the show, please like, share, and comment, or just leave a suggestion. Also, stay tuned for the next interview, and thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.